This is Future Fork, a show that explores the world of food and the decisions we can make today that will shape our future. On the show, you'll hear from innovators in the food space. We'll have disruptive conversations with people from around the globe who are taking the lead on topics like food sustainability, ending world hunger, food security, and so much more. I'm your host, Paul Newnham. In today's episode, I'm joined by Amelia Christie-Miller. Amelia is passionate about beans. She's the founder of Bold Bean Co., an organisation whose mission is to make the world obsessed with beans. And she's also the author of the amazing cookbook, Bold Beans. In today's conversation, Amelia shares her journey into loving beans. You'll hear about the benefits of beans. Amelia talks about her cookbook, and Amelia shares her plans to complete her mission and make the world obsessed with beans. Let's dive in. Amelia, how are you?
Very well, thank you.
For those that don't know Amelia, who you are, can you give us a little bit of an intro?
I am Amelia. I am the founder of Bold Bean Co., the brand on a mission to make you obsessed with beans by giving you the best of beans. I set it up 2 years ago after having worked in the food sustainability space, working with top chefs and leading to a massive bean obsession, which I know you share with me.
Absolutely, absolutely. And where did your bean obsession come from?
I would say it's a slow builder. It started with me first ever tasting a really good quality heirloom bean. And then over time, I was seeing as chefs were leaning into a more plant-based, more veg-centric dish, they were relying on beans to give kind of sustenance, heartiness. And then working with, chefs and farmers and growers, learning about soil health and food security and how the solution to a lot of those problems lies in beans. I mean, it's pretty hard not to become bean obsessed, I think, when you know as much as I do. Yeah.
And you said heirloom beans. What's that?
So heirloom is a funny word. I think that, in the UK, people most commonly associate it with a tomato, and it's basically not the mass-produced version. So the bean that I tried in Spain was called a Julián de la Granja, which is a Spanish scarlet runner bean variety, and it's got a lot of a thinner skin, and it's creamier in the middle, so it's actually got a different Latin name to the conventional butter bean.
Well, in Spain, I know when I was in Barcelona, one of the things I loved was how beans are so much part of the culture, and that you can go and get pre-cooked beans from a bean shop where you can get your dry beans here and your cooked beans here. Did you see some of those bean stores? And it's interesting, what was your reaction to beans in Spain?
Yeah, I mean, before going to Spain, I really didn't like beans. I never liked baked beans, and I thought that they were kind of really dull and not aspirational. And I think suddenly appreciating them in the context of Spain, where it's so part of their food culture and it works so beautifully with the other ingredients they use, and the whole journey of cooking beans from scratch is just something they have simmering away. And I think that was fundamental to my perceiving beans in a new light and across the whole journey.
In Spain, what is that? I know you've done some research into how beans and culture connect. What did you learn about Spain?
Funnily enough, it's actually Rosa, one of the Bold Bean team. She's from Valencia, and a lot of it comes down to the fact that actually the industrialization of meat, and due to the British economy, and kind of we were far more ridding of our own bean culture. Our beans were harder to process, but on top of that, we had access to meat far more readily available because we were a wealthier country in the last 200 years, whereas because Spain wasn't as wealthy over those years, they still preserved that bean culture because they couldn't just jump to a factory farm chicken. And I think that now puts the Spanish in such a strong position for reducing meat because they've retained their bean culture, whereas I think in the UK we've lost ours completely.
So one of the things that I often kind of talk about is how do you describe kind of what good food means? Because you've talked about you don't like certain things, you like certain things. But when you hear the idea of good food, how do you apart from beans, which I'm sure are a part of your definition, how do you kind of think about that?
Yeah, I think that first one is really about how it got to the plate and who's behind it and the love that's put into the individual products. And the more love that's been put in, the more delicious the dish is going to be. But reality is, it's really hard with modern supply chains. But if good food would represent, produce that might have been ideally grown in your garden if you've got a garden, and then also like very heavy on the plants, there's more and more evidence to show that being heavy on the plants, we know that that's good for reducing meat, but it's also incredible for gut health and, plant diversity is really important. So I would say like a really thriving bowl of veggies, very veg-centric and seasonal veggies that have been grown with love.
What's your favourite recipe then for beans?
Oof, it's really hard. I would say one that I do like really often should be my favourite because it's what I rely on, and it's miso beans. So you cook miso with maybe some butter or some like light oil, and then you add beans with their beanstalk or with some water or with some stock, and it kind of turns into this miso beanie porridge. And then you load it up with maybe some kimchi, maybe some fresh blanched like veggies, maybe some chili oil and some seeds and nuts, or maybe half an egg. And I just always find you have those ingredients to hand. You can always freestyle and add some shredded carrot here or whatever you have in your fridge, and therefore I lean into it quite a lot.
Yeah. So I understand you've got a cookbook coming out soon.
We do. It's very exciting.
And so what's your hope with the cookbook in terms of helping get this kind of mission out there?
So I see a huge part of my journey into loving beans in my working with top chefs, because seeing them display beans in this new light really influenced my perception of them. So I see that as a huge part of people beginning to love beans, seeing beans in a new light, seeing how versatile they are, not pigeonholing them in a 3-bean chili. They can be more than that. So we always wanted to do that. And I think that really hopefully you'll see when you look at the cookbook, it's full of such colourful, vibrant, exciting, delicious-looking recipes. They are not a compromise. A lot of people are like, oh, if I'm eating beans, then I'm compromising from eating my sausage or whatever. You'll see these recipes and you're just like, oh, I want to eat that. And it happens to be really great for me and the planet at the same time. That's just a bonus. So I'm really excited about how it's going to shift perceptions of how beans can be used.
Yeah. So you've kind of stepped into this. You stepped into it over COVID time. It's quite challenging time to start anything. What's some of the things that you've learned along the way trying to kind of help people understand the benefit of beans, but also like get them to think about food in a different way? What are some of the insights that you've gained through that process?
I think that people aren't as stubborn as they first seem when it comes to a food group. That I faced a lot of disappointment when people heard that I was starting a food business, and they're like, oh, what's it going to be? And they were disappointed, and almost that's where I see the opportunity, changing this really bad perception of beans. So that has been something which I've continued to tackle, but also I'm not disheartened by. I'm actually excited by when people have those strong opinions, because I know that they can be converted through what we do and through a greater understanding of beans. I think that's probably been the biggest takeaway in terms of understanding the perception of beans and how to shift it, just not getting disheartened by stubborn people, because you can change them.
Yeah. And in terms of what have you seen that's most successful in driving that change? What are some tips to maybe others that are thinking about seaweed or thinking about other products out there? I know a lot of people are doing work on millets, but changing diets is really hard. Changing what people love to eat is really hard. What's some of the tips that you would say for people?
I would say what we did was specifically go after the foodie consumer to begin with, because my view is that if your foodie friend tells you that something's cool, or if your foodie friend serves you up a plate of beans, you're going to be influenced. So I saw that as essential. We could have gone after a vegan consumer, but we didn't want to do that because we think everyone should love beans, not just vegans. We think everyone should.
Yeah, I love that.
So as a result, a lot of our marketing budget, basically all of our marketing budget, goes in the form of gifting to food writers and those that are leading our food culture forward, and that I believe that is food writers and top chefs. So a lot of our budget goes to them, and I think if they have your product in their cupboard, they're just more likely to cook with it because they can't be bothered to go shopping. Oh, what can I do? They're creative people.
Yeah.
And so if they've got some seaweed lying around, they'll be like, oh, maybe I could do something with that. And then it inspires them. So being really generous with the product that you're trying to get into food culture, I think, is essential in helping it trickle down into the everyday person's life.
But it's also focus, and that's something that I think you've focused on a particular type of people. For those that have never or had the pleasure of eating some of the Bold Bean products, they're also they're presented in a very different way. And so, you know, there's lots of different ways to have beans, everything from dry beans to cans to jars to I've seen pouches, all different kinds of solutions coming onto the market. But tell me a little bit about why you guys chose what you did and how that kind of has gone for you.
Yeah, so we sell ours in kind of premium glass jars, and I think it's twofold. First of all, that's a really important part of our process. It enables a slower cook, which preserves a lot of the texture in the bean. But also, you know, we're dealing with a commodity category that people have firm perceptions of, whereas premiumizing it, you know, if we were to do that in the same format, it's a harder story to tell, whereas people associate kind of a glass jar where you can see the product, you know, we're proud of this product, we're not trying to hide it, is a really kind of positive message and makes people feel excited when they're seeing the jar presented beautifully. So I think it was a really important part of helping people see that beans can be something exciting and premium, and it can be a gift.
Yeah.
And the glass was essential in that, I see.
And so when you think about beans, I mean, lots of people, what's the one thing you've learned about beans that you think people really don't understand well, you know, in terms of like how they kind of fit into the ecosystem, diet, like what's something that's kind of stood out to you?
I think it's a number of things, but I think the thing that people kind of forget is that for years and years we relied on beans as a civilization, and they forgotten how fundamental they were to our whole kind of journey into the society we live in today. And I think that kind of, you know, the role they played in farming and agriculture as a natural fertilizer, the role they played in health, everyone's kind of forgotten about that. But I think that if they can learn to appreciate how fundamental they were in getting us here today, they can also learn to appreciate how fundamental they are in getting us to a better version of the future.
Yeah. And I mean, when you think about the future and you think about some of the challenges we face, but then also as a company where you are now and where you want to be, what's your hope in, you know, 5 years' time? Like what's that goal that you guys are going for?
So we would love to, in 5 years' time, be known as the brand that made us love beans. We would love to be getting people eating beans 3 days a week. We don't know how, obviously this is our cookbook, and our beautiful beans right now is one of the ways that we're doing it now, but that could change. Maybe in 3 years' time we'll have a completely different range, but the goal is to make people be eating beans more regularly because people will be happier, soils will be healthier, and I do just see the world being way better off if everyone loved beans.
Absolutely. And tell me, you know, at the moment, where are your beans available?
We're in Waitrose, Whole Foods, Planet Organic, Selfridges, Delsford Organic, and online.
And have you got any plans to go global?
Absolutely. Aim big. Yeah, we're working on it. We kind of really want to nail the UK first, but we have a lot of interest from the US market, so we will look at there in time.
Yeah. I mean, the UK is a big bean market, I guess. Traditionally has eaten a lot of beans in kind of different forms, but yeah, interesting to hear how that kind of global approach, you know, US is a good market to think about, but where else have you thought about?
I think that, you know, in the Mediterranean, they already have a really great relationship with beans.
Yeah.
So I feel like us going in and getting them to see beans in a new culinary light, they're a bit like, we actually know how to cook. Can you go away, please? Whereas I think that in the UK, where we're less tied to a food culture, I think the same with Australia, it's a bit more of a melting pot. They're far more open-minded around, you know, miso beans, like with cannellini white beans. Like for a lot of people, they're like, what? That does not work. It does work, but you've obviously got to not be restricted by, certain cuisines. And I think that is going to work best in countries where there's more of a mix in food culture.
Yeah, I mean, as you were talking, one of the things that I suppose with beans we often think about is this idea of what category do they fit in. So you've got kind of like dry beans, then you've got, beans for Mexican food, beans for like dals and lentils for Indian food. Do you think that holds back beans in some way? Do you know what I mean? Like getting them categorized, or do you think we need to kind of change the way that beans are perceived across the different categories?
Definitely. I think that it really is limiting. I think there's so, if you think about a carrot can go into almost every dish in the world. It's not pigeonholed, and like neither should be, a black bean shouldn't be reserved for Mexican cooking. It looks really beautiful with like, soy and a lot of like Asian condiments, because the blackness just soaks up all that flavor and can work really well in that kind of style of cooking. And it's sad to just leave it in Mexico,
Yeah. Share it round. No, but I mean, I often think about that when you go to a supermarket and you're looking for options and you kind of go, where do I find those options? And you go to often like the canned goods aisle, but then you also like beans are used in bowls, for example, so they should be in the fresh produce. And so it's about, sometimes I think there's a real retail positioning strategy that can be really limiting, but also an opportunity. And it's about how you kind of present that to people, because we're all, creatures of habit somewhat, and so, it's really, really interesting. So, Amelia, thank you for chatting with me, and super excited about this mission to really make everyone obsessed with beans. Can already see that passion, overflowing. And if you don't follow Bold Bean on Instagram, you'll see so much inspiration there. And so definitely check them out, and we'll put those links down in the bits below this.
Great.
You know those bits?
I do. Great.
But yeah, Amelia, as your cookbook launches and everything else, just wish you all the best.
Thank you.
You've been listening to Future Fork, a show that explores the world of food and the decisions we can make today that will shape our future. Future Fork is produced by Disruptive Consulting Solutions and supports the SDG2 Advocacy Hub. For more info, head to the website futureforkpodcast.com. This show was produced with strategy and production support from Wavelength Creative. So you don't miss an episode of Future Fork, make sure to subscribe to or follow the show in your podcast app. And while you're there, leave us a 5-star review. It really helps others find the show. I'm Paul Newnham, and I'll see you in the next episode.